She burned my mother's wedding ring. She demolished my childhood home, and she turned my father into a prisoner in his own life. I called her my evil stepmother, but even that name doesn't do her justice. What started with a tragedy turned into years of manipulation, betrayal, and emotional warfare. I was only 14 when it began, and by the time I was 30, she had stolen nearly everything that mattered to me. This is not a story of fairy tale revenge, it is a story of surviving a real-life villain. I grew up in what you might call an average family, at least. That's how it looked from the outside. There was me, the youngest, my older sister, who I didn't really get along with at first, my dad, who was gone most of the year working overseas, and my mom, who spent the last years of her life fighting cancer. My parents' marriage was basically one long argument, even when my dad was home, which wasn't often. The house never felt warm. They talked about divorce constantly, but somehow stayed together, maybe out of habit or because it was easier than actually splitting up. When I was around 14, my mom's cancer got worse. She was in the hospital a lot toward the end, and I'm not proud to admit this, but I basically stopped visiting. I couldn't handle seeing her fade away, looking more like a ghost every time. My dad wasn't much better. He was there physically, sometimes, but he seemed detached, like he was just waiting for it all to be over, so he could get back to his life. If there was one person who stepped up, it was my sister. Even though she and my mom hadn't gotten along when we were kids, she sat by her bedside every day, held her hand, talked to her, and stayed until the very end. When my mom passed, it was my sister who made sure her ashes were released according to her wishes. It was like she transformed overnight from someone I barely trusted to the one person I knew would never let me down. After my mom died, things got worse in the house. My dad didn't stick around long. He basically left me alone in that house while he went back overseas, picking up right where he'd left off. My sister was living with her by then, so I was the only one rattling around that empty home, trying to keep things going. I was 14, way too young to be on my own, but I didn't have much choice. That house became everything to me. My mom had filled it with love when she was alive, and even though it felt empty now, it was still the one place that felt like mine. So I did what I had to do. I found a tenant to rent out one of the rooms. That rent money covered groceries, bills, and the little things I needed to stay afloat. It wasn't illegal, I knew that even then, but I also knew no one was going to come in and help me. If anything, reporting it would have just made life harder for everyone. Meanwhile, my dad was gone for 7 months at a time, and even when he was in the country, he was barely home. He'd spend nights with whatever woman he was seeing at the time, leaving me on my own in the house we used to call a family home. I'd get the occasional text or call asking how things were, but that was about it. The truth is, I got used to him not being around. It was easier than hoping he'd actually come back and be a dad. I learned to cook for myself, handle rent money, pay bills, clean up after tenants, and just generally survive. By the time I was 16, I felt older than my dad in a lot of ways. He was out chasing women, hopping from one fling to the next, while I was dealing with broken water heaters and late rent from tenants. My sister checked in on me when she could, but she had her own life going on. She'd drop by sometimes, bring food or help me clean the place up. The bond we'd built after Mom died got stronger every year, and she slowly became the one person I knew I could trust completely. Looking back, I didn't really have a childhood. There was no safety net, no shoulder to cry on. There was just the house, the memory of my mom, and my sister. My dad had always been a distant figure, but now he was more like a ghost who drifted in and out when it suited him. That foundation, fragile, fractured, and already marked by loss, was what set the stage for everything that happened later. It's also what taught me, way too early, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need to protect yourself from. It started small, like 100 tiny paper cuts that you barely notice at first. Little things that, if you complained about them, made you sound petty or paranoid. That was evil stepmother's specialty. Microaggressions that built up so slowly you almost didn't notice they were happening until you were bleeding out from them. The first rule she laid down was simple. We could not mention our mother. The worst of it was how she tried to drive a wedge between me and my sister. Anytime she got one of us alone, she would start in on the other. Our family dogs had been with us since before she showed up. They were part of the glue that held our home together after Mom died. Any holiday or milestone became a twisted opportunity to remind me of how little I mattered to them. I'd find out about family events after they happened, or get cold invites at the last second that felt more like an insult than anything else. Birthdays, anniversaries, celebrations, they all became tools for her to remind me of my place. One day, while I was at work, she and my dad showed up unannounced, loaded them into the car, and took them away. No call, no heads up, nothing. Just gone. She'd tell me how lazy and selfish my sister was, how she'd never amount to anything, how she didn't really care about me. Evil stepmother stood behind him, smirking. That was the day I realized I was never going to win by playing fair. Then, when my sister visited, she'd do the same, feeding her lines about how I was immature, ungrateful, or a burden. At all. Not in stories, not in passing, not even in front of my dad. Instead, it was the low hiss of her voice in a corner, the quick smile that never reached her eyes, the way she could warp the truth just enough that you started to doubt your own sanity. But my dad decided, on a whim, to cut their vacation short and come surprise me for a day. A quiet kind of cruelty, gathering strength like a storm on the horizon. And we were all just standing there, waiting for it to hit. And the worst part was watching my dad let it happen. Watching him nod along or sit in silence while she took little pieces of us apart. That surprise would become a curse I had to carry for 5 whole years. The hopeful kid who'd been relieved she wasn't another gold digger had been replaced by someone constantly second-guessing his own worth. Every time evil stepmother saw me after that, she would bring up how my stupid birthday had ruined their holiday. She would sigh dramatically, roll her eyes, or mutter insults under her breath, over and over, like it was some grave betrayal I had committed. Any hint of nostalgia about the woman who brought me into this world, raised me, cared for me when my dad was overseas, was strictly forbidden. If I slipped up even by accident, there would be a snide comment, or sometimes just a cold, silent stare that made the air in the room feel like ice. Then there was my 21st birthday. I hadn't even asked him to come home for it. I knew better by then. She knew exactly what mattered to me, and she chipped away at those things bit by bit. At first it almost worked. There were days when my sister and I would argue, fueled by things evil stepmother had whispered to us in secret. But the truth was, she underestimated the bond we had built after Mom died. Eventually, we compared notes and realized exactly what she was doing. It was a relief in a way to finally see it clearly, but it also hurt, because it meant we had to be on guard even around our own family. Evil stepmother wasn't just content to poison relationships, she also wanted to erase the past. I came home to an empty house and an empty yard, and when I confronted my dad, he brushed it off as something they had to do. The psychological games only escalated from there. I think the hardest part was the subtlety of it all. She never threw plates or started big dramatic fights. Looking back, it was like she was training us, grooming us to accept being treated like afterthoughts. By the time a few years had passed, I barely recognized the version of myself who had once believed she was a good thing for our family. She hadn't done anything outright monstrous yet, but I could feel something darker building beneath the surface. The house became more than just a place to live. It was my sanctuary, my link to the past, the one place that still felt like it belonged to my mom in some way. Even though my dad technically owned it, it was me who kept it alive. By the time I was in my early 20s, I was the de facto landlord. I managed tenants, fixed leaky faucets, handled rent, and kept the place from falling apart. It was far from glamorous, but it was mine. I poured everything I had into maintaining it. I wanted it to be the kind of home my mom would have been proud of, something stable that gave me a sense of control in a life where not much else made sense. Meanwhile, my dad was off living his usual chaotic life. He floated in and out of relationships, traveling overseas for work, barely acknowledging the house except when he wanted rent. Even though his name was still on the deed, everyone, including him, understood that I was the one keeping it alive. The place was more than bricks, and more to it was my last tie to my mother, to the life we had before everything went to hell. And then he came back, out of nowhere one afternoon. He showed up with a car full of boxes, declaring he'd left evil stepmother and needed a place to stay. I didn't even have time to react before he started hauling his stuff into the house. He didn't ask if he could move back in, he just did it. At first I tried to keep the peace. I didn't want to fight him, and part of me hoped maybe this meant he was finally done with her. But living with him quickly became impossible. Within a month, every single one of my tenants had broken their leases and left. My dad was loud, demanding, and impossible to reason with. He left dishes in the sink, fought with me about stupid things, and treated me like some freeloading teenager, even though I was the one paying him rent for the place. Then, as quickly as he'd come, he went back overseas. He left me with an empty house and still expected me to pay rent for the month he'd driven everyone out. I refused. For once I put my foot down. He'd made it impossible for me to keep the place running, and I wasn't going to hand over money I didn't have. Of course, he was furious, but it didn't matter. He drifted off again, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Slowly, I rebuilt. I got new tenants, fixed what he'd broken, and tried to find some peace again. But just when I thought things were finally settling, he came back, and with him came chaos. This time he brought along the same woman he'd left evil stepmother 4 years ago. Their relationship was always a revolving door of breakups and reconciliations. I honestly lost track of how many times they got engaged, called it off, then got back together again. Eventually he left her again for evil stepmother, remarried her, and slid back into the same toxic patterns that had driven me half mad the first time. Throughout all of this, the house was like a battlefield always under siege, always the thing he dangled over my head. He knew how much it meant to me. He knew that even though I was paying him rent, he held the deed. It wasn't just about bricks and walls, it was about power. It was about who got to call the shots. Even though I was the one who kept the place afloat, he never let me forget whose name was on the papers, and I knew, deep down, that he'd never be able to resist using that against me when it suited him. It became this unspoken tension between us, hanging in the air every time he showed up. We never talked about it, but we both knew. The house was leveraged. As long as he held that, he could hurt me whenever he wanted, and evil stepmother knew it too. Even when she wasn't there physically, she was always in the background, whispering poison into his ear, fueling his sense of entitlement, reminding him that I was just a tenant in his eyes. The house was supposed to be my shield, the last piece of safety I had in a family that felt like it was always at war with itself. But instead, it turned into a weapon, something my dad and evil stepmother could use to keep me in line, to remind me how fragile my security really was. I did my best to hold on to it, to make it feel like home. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the rug got pulled out from under me. And with people like them, that time was always closer than you thought. The house was never just a house. It was the last piece of my mother I had left, the place where every corner held some fading memory of a life that used to be normal. I was only 14 when I started renting out the rooms just to stay afloat. It was risky, maybe even illegal, but I didn't care. That house was my anchor, my safety net, and I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. My dad, meanwhile, acted like it was his vacation property he'd drift in whenever he got bored with wherever he was staying, or when his latest fling fell through, then vanished again for months at a time. When he was gone, it was mine. I kept the place running, paid the bills, did the repairs, and took care of tenants who often saw me more as a landlord than a kid barely out of high school. But every time he returned, it was like a storm sweeping in. He never respected the fact that I was the one holding it all together. He'd criticize the way I managed things, tell me how to run the house, pick fights about the smallest things, then disappear again before the dust settled. It was during one of those times years later, after he had married evil stepmother, that the real power struggle began. My dad came back from overseas with boxes in the car announcing he'd left evil stepmother and was moving back in. No discussion, no warning, just a declaration that he needed the house again. I tried to make it work. Maybe part of me still wanted his approval, or maybe I was just too tired to fight. But within a month, every single one of my tenants had broken their leases and left. He was impossible to live with, messy, loud, controlling. He treated me like I was freeloading in the house I'd kept alive all these years, like I owed him something for letting me stay. When he left again to go back overseas, he demanded rent from me for the month he'd driven everyone out. That was the first time I told him no. I was done paying him for the privilege of having my life turned upside down every time he showed up. I thought that was the worst it would get. I rebuilt again, got new tenants, got the house running smoothly. But my dad was never out of the picture for long. He came back again and again, sometimes alone, sometimes with whatever new woman he was using to distract himself from his own miserable choices. The house became the bargaining chip in every argument. If I pushed back, he'd remind me whose name was on the deed. If I didn't do exactly what he wanted, he'd threaten to sell it, to kick me out, to leave me with nothing. Evil stepmother knew this too. Even during times when they were supposedly separated, she was always there in the background, feeding the narrative that I was ungrateful, that I didn't deserve the place, that my dad was being too kind, letting me stay. She would show up unexpectedly, sometimes with him, sometimes alone, poking around the property like she was casing it for demolition. What stung the most was that I had done everything right. I kept the house standing, paid him rent even when I could barely afford it, sacrificed my own comfort and security to preserve the only home I'd ever known. But none of that mattered. In their eyes, I was just a tenant in their way, a loose end they could cut whenever it was convenient. There were days when I thought about walking away, about leaving the whole mess behind and starting over somewhere else. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. That house wasn't just wood and brick, it was my mother's smile in the kitchen. It was the hallway where I'd hidden with my sister during our parents' fights. It was every scraped knee and tear-streaked face and quiet moment of peace I'd ever known. Letting go felt like giving up on her, and I wasn't ready for that. So I stayed. I rebuilt every time they tried to knock me down. But in the back of my mind, I knew it couldn't last forever. My dad held the deed. An evil stepmother was patient. She didn't need to force me out right away, she just had to wait until the moment when I had nothing left to fight with. And I think, deep down, they both knew that too. That no matter how strong I thought I was, the day would come when they would take the one thing that meant everything to me, and there would be nothing I could do to stop them. When my sister had her baby, it felt like there might be some light at the end of this long, twisted tunnel. My niece was beautiful, full of life and promise, and somehow, evil stepmother actually seemed to soften around her. I had fallen in love, found someone who I thought was my forever. A series of unlucky breaks left me bleeding money, barely able to make rent on the house. Then my dog, my loyal, sweet companion who had been there through it all, got sick with a rare blood disease. She started calling my sister day and night, demanding answers about why my dad had left her. I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought maybe it would finally set everyone free. My sister was in tears, torn between not wanting to betray our dad's secrets and being unable to watch this woman unravel. She wanted everything: who she was, where they were staying, what she looked like. And because I was furious at my dad, I told her what little I knew. Even though I never liked evil stepmother, I also hated what my dad was doing to her, using her up, discarding her, stringing her along while he chased the next thrill. When evil stepmother discovered the info I gave her was false, she flew into a rage. She stormed into that parlor, screaming threats of lawsuits. A few days later, someone leaked naked photos of the mistress to her boss and she was fired. And as I watched the bulldozers roll up to demolish the only home I had ever known, I realized her revenge wasn't just about my dad, and she wasn't done yet. By the time I realized what was happening, she had already picked apart every piece of my life that mattered. It was about punishing me and my sister for daring to expose the truth, for being witnesses to her humiliation. Remember, it was my sister who had first exposed my dad's cheating to evil stepmother. And even though evil stepmother and my dad eventually remarried, going through that twisted cycle again, she never forgot, never forgave, and never let go of her need to punish the people who had revealed the truth. Evil stepmother decided she could no longer live in the house where my dad had met his mistress. She got herself onto every account, every credit card. She tracked every dollar he spent and demanded explanations for everything. He lost control over his own paycheck, his own life. So they were taking my house back. I had to evict my tenants and move out immediately. He was gaunt, tired, older than his years. He'd smile at me, say something quick and polite. She cut her out completely, leaving her to explain to her own daughter why her grandfather never called, never visited, never even asked about her. I watched my sister break down in tears more times than I could count, trying to hold together a life that evil stepmother had shattered from the shadows. But there was always this flicker of fear in his eyes, like he was terrified she might see him talking to me, terrified of what might happen later when they were alone, to break him so completely that he had nowhere else to go. And in destroying him, she destroyed me and my sister too. Just a slow, suffocating horror show that left us all worse than she found us. And the worst part, she got exactly what she wanted, and she didn't have to lift a finger. Evil stepmother had made him so dependent, so cut off from the rest of the world, that he couldn't even keep his work straight. Evil stepmother bragged about how there was no way for my dad to sneak around on her again. She could watch his every move from her phone, every second of the day. She took away his privacy, his friends, his freedom, everything that made him human. It was like watching someone slowly drown, but instead of trying to swim, he just lay back and let the water pull him under. It was subtle at first, little comments whispered into his ear, stories twisted just enough to make my sister seem ungrateful, petty, selfish. She'd even tried going through evil stepmother, trying to reason with her, hoping maybe the woman would have a shred of humanity and let her daughter see her grandfather. Every time I saw her, there was this smug satisfaction radiating off her, like she had finally proven to the world how clever and powerful she was. She had torn apart my family, destroyed my home, turned my dad into a hollow shell of himself, and there was no one who could stop her. She'd show up out of nowhere and tell me how pathetic I was, how she'd always known I was weak, how my mother was a worthless woman whose memory deserved to be erased. She told me once, with absolute glee, how she had taken my mother's wedding ring, a family heirloom my sister had been keeping safe, and thrown it away. But evil stepmother made sure every message was blocked, every door was slammed shut. My dad was never great at seeing past his own ego, and he swallowed every word. He stopped answering my sister's calls, stopped responding to texts, completely ignored his granddaughter, the little girl who once brightened up his life. They even found me a new place, when I could barely afford, in a neighborhood so rough I was scared to step outside after dark. Then she vanished, gone without a trace. Evil stepmother had always bragged about her mob connections, how she could make people disappear. Evil stepmother took over his life in ways I didn't even think possible. She cut him off from his friends, deleting contacts from his phone, blocking people on his social media, erasing his history so the only person he really had left was her. She monitored his phone, his email, every text that came in. If someone reached out that she didn't approve of, the message was deleted before he could even see it. I never found out what happened to that woman, and maybe I don't want to know. My dad disowned me, told me I was dead to him. I found out on Facebook, seeing their wedding photos pop up in my feed like a punch to the gut. I spent everything I had left trying to save her. She died anyway a month later, and I was left with nothing but the guilt that maybe I could have done more. But my family, my dad and evil stepmother especially, did everything in their power to sabotage that relationship. They shunned, made her feel unwelcome, and turned every family gathering into a minefield until, eventually, the strain was too much. There was no room for any of it in my new shoebox apartment, so most of it ended up on the sidewalk, taken by strangers or thrown away. She left, and I felt like a part of me had died with that breakup. Even though she had spent years trying to pit me and my sister against each other, she suddenly wanted to play the doting grandmother. For a while it even seemed like maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was easing up. But while my sister was building a new life, I was watching mine fall apart. It didn't end there. My business, which I had poured every cent I had into, started to collapse. Then, just as I was hanging on by a thread, my dad came crashing back into my life on Christmas Eve, no less dragging along his new mistress, a woman who didn't speak a word of English. They communicated through Google Translate. While living in the house I had fought to hold on to, he hadn't given me any warning, hadn't asked if it was okay. He just showed up, dumped his life into mine, and expected me to smile through it. Meanwhile, evil stepmother was having a breakdown of her own. Eventually I told my sister to tell evil stepmother the truth about the affairs. It turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. When evil stepmother found out about my dad's latest mistress, she immediately turned to me for details. But my dad was always 2 steps ahead. He had given me the wrong information deliberately, knowing I might betray him. Evil stepmother didn't stop there. She found the real mistressa masseuse from a parlor she and my dad had visited often. My dad, meanwhile, started working his way back into evil stepmother's arms, rebuilding their marriage behind my back. Then came the final blow. I was forced to pack up 19 years of my life, including everything left of my mother's memory. I was gutted, hollowed out. Evil stepmother practically vibrated with glee watching me lose everything. She had taken my father, my home, my memories, everything that mattered. Evil stepmother's revenge wasn't loud or bloody. It was slow, methodical, and absolutely devastating. After forcing me out of the house, she set her sights on my sister. Her first move was simple but cruel. She poisoned the relationship between my dad and my sister. My sister tried for years to fix things. She reached out again and again, hoping maybe he would come to his senses. Meanwhile, my dad started to vanish, bit by bit. She also took over his finances. My dad had always been kind of careless with money, but evil stepmother turned that weakness into a weapon. He lost his job too. They built a new house on top of the rubble of the one I grew up in, a modern monstrosity with security cameras in every corner, even the bathrooms. And she relished it. Sometimes I'd run into my dad in public and it was like looking at a stranger. An evil stepmother never wasted a chance to remind me what she'd done. With my sister, she used silence as her weapon. Looking back, I don't think evil stepmother wanted my dad so much as she wanted to own him. This wasn't revenge in the storybook sense, no dramatic showdown, no cathartic justice. In the years since everything fell apart, I've learned that grief doesn't just come from losing someone you love. Sometimes it comes from realizing someone you loved was never really who you thought they were. My dad is still alive. Technically, he travels with evil stepmother now, their new house buzzing with security cameras, alarms, and control. I don't see him much. When I do, it's under her awkward visits where I am reminded exactly how little space I am allowed to take up in his life. My sister, for her part, has finally stopped trying. She spent years begging him to talk to her, to call, to acknowledge the granddaughter he used to call his little angel. She left messages that were never answered, sent photos of birthdays and holidays that were probably deleted before he even saw them, and slowly, painfully, she realized she had to let go. Now she's focused on her own family. Her daughter is growing up fast, surrounded by love and stability that my dad never gave us. Sometimes I think about how that little girl will grow up never really knowing the grandfather who once cradled her in his arms. But maybe that's for the best. Maybe the healthiest thing we can do is break the cycle of betrayal, control, and manipulation that poisoned our childhoods. As for me, I'm still standing. I live in a different place now, smaller, yes, but mine. There are nights I lie awake thinking about that old house. The walls that saw every scraped knee, every whispered secret between me and my sister, every late night tear after another fight between my parents. I think about the tree of old stepmother had chopped down, the wedding ring she threw away, the photo albums I had to leave on the sidewalk when I moved out. I think about my dad too. I used to idolize him, even when he wasn't there. He was my dad, this larger-than-life figure who I thought would always have my back. Now, when I see him, I see a man who has been hollowed out and filled back up with someone else's voice, someone else's demands. I don't hate him. I wish I could. It would be easier, but the truth is, I feel sorry for him. He chose this. He chose her. That doesn't mean I've forgiven him. Some betrayals you don't come back from, no matter how hard you try. But I've let go of the part of me that kept hoping he'd change, that he'd turn back into the father I wanted him to be. I've let go of the need for an apology I know will never come. What evil stepmother did wasn't just about taking things away. It was about making us doubt ourselves, making us feel small and helpless and unworthy of love. For a long time, I believed her. I believed I wasn't good enough to keep the house, or to deserve my dad's respect, or to hold on to the people I loved. But that belief isn't in me anymore. These days, I'm focused on building something new. It's not flashy or glamorous. I'm not rich and I'm not powerful. But I'm honest. I take care of the people I care about. I don't hide my scars or pretend the past didn't happen. Maybe that's the closest thing to healing I'm ever going to get. I still get messages from people telling me I should get revenge, that I should find a way to hurt evil stepmother back, destroy her the way she destroyed me. But I've done revenge before, and I know how empty it feels. I'm not interested in becoming the monster in someone else's story. Instead, I tell my story. I put it out into the world so maybe someone else, someone stuck in the middle of their own nightmare, will hear it and know they're not alone. Maybe that's enough. And maybe one day, when evil stepmother is sitting alone in her house full of cameras and locks and empty rooms, she realized the only thing she really won was a prison of her own making. That's not my revenge, it's just the truth. In the end, evil stepmother didn't just tear apart a family, she built her own prison. One made of control, fear, and bitterness. My sister and I moved on, scarred but stronger, refusing to let her define us. My dad, he chose his fate, and though it hurts, I've stopped waiting for him to come back. If you've survived someone like this, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments, hit like if this resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more true tales of survival, betrayal, and moving on. Thanks for watching and take care of yourselves.